Well, welcome to 160. You and I have sat in these seats before, but not in 160, so thanks for making the trip.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for hosting me here for the first time.
Yeah, you traded some information with me. We won't divulge here, back in the green room, so thanks for that. But before we get into the moon story, what's happening in the market right now? What are you seeing happening in the market right now? Where do you see surgeries going? Is there a sort of a stratification occurring on solutions and needs in the market?
So, you know, it's not a secret that the population is growing and aging, right? And as a general principle, people would rather live in good health and, you know, die later, meaning that, you know, the demand for surgery is rising, right? There's a surge in volume, and there's a fundamental challenge for hospitals to absorb that volume given thin margins, very challenging operating models. And as a result of that, there is a shift that everyone is seeing to different care settings, specifically the outpatient setting or the ambulatory setting, where margins are healthier, patients are happier, staff is happier, the work-life conditions and balance are better managed, but that requires adjustments to the system. So that's what we're seeing. It's a very dynamic environment and one that offers great opportunities, but also triggers a number of new needs and requirements.
What are some of the struggles as we move from a hospital setting where it's totally understandable, high acuity, high complexity, complex solutions required for the problem at hand, surgery? But as we move to these outpatient surgery centers into ASCs, what are the challenges there as they start to contend with lower and mid acuity type procedures?
So everybody understands the benefit of doing these procedures in an ambulatory setting, right? It's you're home at night. Obviously, the staff is home, you know, after 5 p.m. Everything is a lot more controlled. But the downside is that nothing can go wrong. Nothing can go unplanned, right? You cannot afford, you know, complications that are going to require to bring the patient back to the hospital. Otherwise, you defeat the whole purpose, right, of bringing those patients in the ASC. You have to be able to manage what happens when a staff member is missing because the babysitter didn't show up or something like that. I mean, these things create a lot of stress in the system. Because the ultimate goal is to turn these outpatient centers, ambulatory surgery centers, into you know, just very replicable pathways, right? Surgical factories, if you will, not in a you know, wrong sense, but in the sense that everything is controlled and every patient gets the same care quality and is able to go home, you know, with the same satisfaction, right, ultimately. So the downside, if you will, is that things have to be extremely well managed and controlled, and predictability becomes a key factor, right, for enabling that shift.
And so what I hear you saying is that variability and predictability, we're able to keep that in a much tighter control environment without needing the complexity of some of the larger platforms that do phenomenal work, but maybe overkill or wrong equipment for wrong mission. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what this means is, you know, there is a spectrum in the types of procedures that will need to be done, and that is going to remain, right? Complex procedures versus simple procedures, typically oncology-related procedures versus benign or functional procedures, as they are called. And there's going to be basically a spectrum in where those procedures are done and which platform, which equipment, which skill sets are required for these different types of environments. So, you know, it's essentially saying, you know, one size fits all is probably not the right concept here, and we have to come up with new operating models, new solutions.
And so it's almost like one category is built a solution for problem X, but in the ASC, an outpatient, we're actually need to solve for problem Y as the primary driver. Quality care always, you know, highest standard, right? But when you talked about predictability, variability controlled, and you're also talking about cost, that larger complex platform doesn't necessarily map to that model. That's what I'm hearing here.
That's absolutely right. And I think, to be fair, it really boils down to when those platforms were built and what the imperatives of the healthcare systems and specifically the OR were at that time, right? If you think about when, robotic surgery started, everything was happening in the hospital. In the hospital, you have resources around the clock. And the challenge at the time was, how do we broaden access to minimally invasive surgery, right? How do we overcome the challenges of surgeons and staff members having to get trained on laparoscopy, which was, very disruptive, very new, required entire generations of surgeons to adopt something new at a point where they had been working for 10, 20, 30 years. And therefore created a lot of pressure on the system. And so the question at that time was, how can we level up surgical technique and skills to facilitate the adoption of minimally invasive approaches? Well, that was the problem, 20, 25 years ago in the hospital setting, right? Fast forward in 2026, as we discussed, the imperatives are different. It's how can we facilitate that shift to the ambulatory setting and make, again, this minimally invasive surgical care accessible to the broader number of patients in that setting without compromising on quality. Again, a different problem, therefore a different set of solutions.
Yeah, we muddled our way through that problem. What was the next one in front of us now that we solved it, which is typical. And it's funny you bring that up, and it's a great point, Ann, that if you listen to robotic-assisted surgery in 2013, 14, 15, the primary driver was, let's not make the greatest surgeons even greater. It was, as we look at the control group, can we bring those who don't have the time or maybe the skills in laparoscopy to use an augmented technology to pull up that curve, so in the mean, all surgeons on average become better.
Yes.
Okay, solve that problem, but now we've got that new problem. We've got volume, changing sites of care. And that brings me into I love this term that you and the team have come out with, is scalable surgery. And what does scalable surgery mean through the lens of Amun?
Scalable surgery is about the ability to bring, high-level surgical care to the greatest number of patients in any setting, regardless of, who's in the room, who's not in the room that day, which procedure is being done, and where it's being done. It's really about this notion of deepening, broadening health equity as a whole in the OR.
So it's not necessarily we need a new robot, but we need a new category. And is that where Moon is putting itself? Is it creating a brand new category?
It's not something a single company is going to do, because it is a healthcare system mandate, if you will, that trickles down to our industry, right? It means that in our industry we have to wear a different lens, and we have to think about the products we're building as solutions to that problem, right? And a number of people are already working in that direction. We can work together to solve that problem, and it's not about a new robot or a new specific product.
Right, but it sounds like it's a new category of technologies that address a current day issue that may have not existed a decade ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm a surgeon in the OR, and regardless, OR hospital, OR, ASC setting, outpatient, what exactly does Mastro do for me as a surgeon and part of the care team?
Yeah, so Dr. Mullings, you're at the center of the OR.
My mom would be happy.
And what Mastro does is it's going to give you control over all the instruments that are used in that laparoscopic surgery, typically 4 instruments, right? And so it means that you're going to have control over all of these instruments, and you're going to be able to switch from one to the other in a way that is deliberate, smooth, without having to rely on the people assisting you to do that. And those people in the same time are going to be focused on anticipating the next thing that you're going to need, right? Instrument exchanges, getting something into the OR, getting an information from anesthesia, making adjustments. etc. And what this means is that you and your staff are going to be parallel working constantly rather than interrupting, waiting on each other, coordinating, and you're going to be in the flow during the entire procedure. This is what is going to make it smoother from beginning to end, faster, and a lot more consistent.
Now, we also have a high level of intelligence on board with our partner NVIDIA and the Scope Pilot. So what does that mean as a creative technology sort of value to the care team and the surgeon, and more importantly, the patient?
Yeah, so the AI component is only interesting if it strengthens and aligns with your value proposition, right? As a whole, it's a means to an end, if you will. As any technological break that we leverage in the platform. So today it means accelerating and automating some of the steps that happen before, during, and after the surgery. The first AI model that we included, as you said, is Scope Pilot, which is the ability to maneuver the camera automatically so that it stays focused on the active instruments of the surgeon and what the surgeon is doing throughout the procedure. It makes the surgeon more autonomous, right? And our whole value proposition is on that autonomy, control, and stability, which delivers greater control, which delivers greater predictability, right? So Scope Pilot is a part of that, if you will. And then there are other features that we've added, such as automating the setup and then automating the case reports at the beginning and end of the procedure that are accretive to that mandate and to that value proposition of streamlining the workflow and making sure that the care team is focused on the patient.
And I listened closely, you said today. Does that infer there's other opportunities under the hood downrange as we think about not just using AI broadly as sort of blunt force trauma, to use a word, but where it's really needed, where it gets the highest value, and sometimes it's in the procedure and sometimes it's bookending the procedure?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities in partnering with people, which we can also discuss, because a lot of people have been thinking about solving some of these issues for years and in a very dedicated way, right? Whether it's optimizing staffing, optimizing scheduling, managing inventory, all of those things, are real needs in the OR. It's not just about the procedure-centric, requirements. It's about building a system-wide solution that is going to deliver benefits, across basically the delivery of surgical care.
And with that partnership you have with NVIDIA, you've got that processing power on board on Mastro now, correct?
Yeah, so it was a choice that we made from the beginning to have that edge computing on premise. I think largely because our systems are connected, right, to the cloud through 5G and Wi-Fi. And in doing that, we've learned how challenging it is for healthcare providers to get comfortable with the fact that you're going to be, sending data sort of up and down, and doing that with data that is by definition very sensitive, right? So we have built an architecture where some of the data can be sent in the cloud, such as utilization data, logs, etc., that we need for different purposes. But some of the data can be processed really in the operating room without any latency, without any risk to the data, without any cyber risk, so that these features can be delivered, in real time.
Oh, so you can be, if you will, a host to these phenomenal tools that are being developed by outside sort of parties that don't have a place to reside. So if you build a platform, but you don't have a place to park it,
yeah,
then does that platform really exist?
Yeah, we're the Trojan horse, if you will.
Right.
They will not have to worry about, how do they access their own infrastructure.
Yeah, you've solved that problem for them.
Yeah.
So we talk about efficiencies, predictability, reliability. Tell me about the clinical activity that's going on, and you've got real evidence of the ability for that to, let's say, create value, but also create profitability for surgical centers.
Yeah, so today we have treated 3,500 patients commercially, and we have very consistent data coming out of those, different sites and surgeons, tens of surgeons using the system. This data is typically about reducing variability, as we said, and this is, on multiple indications with different cohorts. A reduction that is between 25 and 35% depending on the indication. So it is a significant shrinkage of that buffer time that you have to allow for when you schedule your day in an operating room. And what this means is when you shrink that buffer time, well, then you can add a procedure and still finish on time with the same amount of resources. So that is data that we have replicated across sites, across indications. And that we use a lot, of course, when we pitch our solution. We have additional data that is, of course, about the impact of that, meaning how many procedures can you add. So we have shown that we can add 4 procedures per week on average to a surgical schedule, which is meaningful in terms of capturing incremental volume, incremental revenue, and then funding, of course, the Mastro program.
When we think about robotics in general, especially large format, we constantly hear comparisons between degrees of freedom, accessibility, setup time, how many people in the OR it either eliminates or allows to repurpose. Is that the right lens, meaning telemetry and capabilities of the robotic performance, versus should we be looking at through a different lens or an additional lens?
I think again, it boils down to the problem you're trying to solve, right? I think there are a number of products and platforms out there that are absolutely best in class for the problem that they're solving, and as a result of that have been, market leaders in their category, right? And will remain that, right, going forward, because they are exquisite at really providing that surgical skill set in complex procedures in a way that, no human could do with just straight stick laparoscopy. I mean, let's be just very, thankful.
Yeah, thankful.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's a great thing that has been added to surgery, right? That everybody recognizes. And okay, so there's that category, right, with fantastic products and market leaders, and then there is the other problem, right, which is the one that we've been focused on over the last 5 years, which is, again, about healthcare equity and delivering great surgical care at scale in this new type of setting. And so this is a category that a number of players are pioneering. It's a category in which we want to, play a big role, where we want to aggregate a number of solutions around our platform and ecosystem, and certainly become the market leader of.
Well, I always look for these analogies, and the surgical world always falls into this reflex of comparing the aviation industry. We talk about checklists in surgery and things like that. And as I'm listening to you, being somebody who flies planes, is you always said right equipment, right mission, right, and then right location. So if I'm thinking about these incredible large format robots that have a high level of complexity required of them, because they're attempting and executing a highly complex mission. I think about a wide body jet. Let's leave Miami and go to Paris, right? And I've got, hundreds of people on that jet, and I've got to make one trip. And in that trip, I've got a very long distance to go, and I need way more technology in that for appropriate trip than if I'm running a shuttle between Miami and Naples, Florida, where I'm doing that 6 times a day, and I need predictability, reliability, I need the right equipment, I still need technology, and I need the right technology for the mission. And the economics in both of those are tremendously different, but serving a critically important purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, it's why, you know, when you fly from Miami to Paris, you board the plane an hour before, you know, it takes off. It's why you expect a good meal on that plane, and an entertainment system. And then when you take the other plane to go to Naples, you expect to be on time and not have to sleep, you know, in Miami. And you don't really care about the types of drinks that you're being served, or even if you get one, right?
Right.
It's just a different set of expectations depending on, you know, what the purpose is.
And both solving a hypercritical mission for the customer, patient, pilot,
And staff.
and staff operating that mission. And that wide body going to Naples would be insane to use.
Yeah,
And
it would
probably
just slow
wouldn't-
doing everything.
Everything, and you couldn't run 8
You
times
couldn't
a
even
day back
land
and
it
forth.
on
You
that
couldn't even
short,
land it. That's right. That too. So as you head off to SRS, what are you going to be looking for this year? What is Moon going to be continuing to, let's call it, solve a predicament in the market? Right mission, right equipment, right people, right spot. What do you expect this year from maybe 2 or 3 years ago when we were there?
I think, you know, we are seeing that shift, right, and that trends, macro trends that we were describing earlier, become more top of mind, right? And of course that is something that is in a way pleasing, right, because that was sort of the founding thesis, right, behind Moon. But it's also an incredible opportunity, right? We want to serve that wave as much as we want to facilitate and enable it, right, and play a role in it. And I think we feel very responsible about that mission, very committed, very engaged. As I said, we also want to aggregate partners in doing that, right? People who recognize the opportunity in the ASC market, who also recognize that it's a completely set of requirements and needs. You don't sell the same things, you don't sell the same way in that market, and so it requires just a different, you know, culture, essentially, in the way you do things. And so I think, you know, for us, SRS is the forum where, you know, the industry gathers and where we can have all of these discussions and just, you know, refine our roadmap going forward.
Yeah, and again, in closing, I love the term scalable surgery. I think it's critically important. You know, we went down a road that was driven by investors and strategics with the data we had at time, and thankful to them, those investments and those product platforms that continue to be developed allowed us to see the newer current problems that we might not have seen before. And on the other side of that lies an opportunity where it looks like Moon is positioning itself extraordinarily well for that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks for coming into Delray.
Well, thanks for hosting again, Joe, and the team.
Thank you. And I will see you down in Miami today, tomorrow, and the next couple of days. Thanks
Absolutely.
again. I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.